They said it was madness. They were wrong. In a land where even goats struggle to survive, Burkina Faso just planted 20 million cashew trees. Not in 30 years. Not in 10. In 3. Pause and let that sink in. A country plagued by drought, insurgency, and international neglect has pulled off what agricultural giants failed to imagine. Bulldozers slicing through cracked earth, villagers planting in 100-degree heat, children learning the value of a nut their grandparents had never even tasted. What kind of nation bets its future on a snack? But these are not just trees. These are grenades disguised as greenery, each one a blow to foreign dependency, to exploitative trade deals, to the myth that Africa must always beg to survive. And the man behind it? A 36-year-old soldier named Ibrahim Traoré, who now stands at the center of one of the most daring economic rebellions of the 21st century. Here's what they're not telling you. This isn't just agriculture. This is economic insurgency. And if it works, it could blow open the doors for a new Africa, one that sells to the world on its own terms. Or not at all. But cashew trees don't grow overnight. They demand patience, water, processing, markets, power, and enemies are already circling. India, Vietnam, private equity firms. They smell the money, and they want in. So, we ask you, will these 20 million trees liberate a nation or chain it to a new master? Let us know in the comments below. Do you believe this cashew revolution is a turning point or another trap? And if you want the raw truth the media won't show you, subscribe now. Because in this war for Africa's future, you deserve to know who's really winning. 20 million cashew trees, or 20 million lives on the line. It started with a promise on a scorching afternoon in Ouagadougou. President Ibrahim Traoré stood tall before thousands, a lone figure against the sunburnt horizon, and declared, "We will plant 20 million cashew trees in 3 years." The crowd erupted in applause, but not everyone clapped. Some held their breath, not because they doubted him, but because they knew this land, where crops die even when the rains come, where dozens of aid projects had poured in, only to vanish like footprints in sand. But this time, something was different. Within weeks, trucks rolled into rural villages carrying bundles of saplings, baby cashew trees, their roots wrapped in burlap. Shivering in the dry Sahel wind, bulldozers tore into bone-dry soil. Young men, women, even soldiers, all wielded shovels like soldiers with rifles. The air felt like war, and it was. A war for economic sovereignty, fought not with bullets, but with nuts. In the very first season, over 50,000 hectares of land turned green, a figure that stunned international observers. They couldn't understand how a poor nation mobilized hundreds of thousands of people and turned dead earth into orchards in mere months. But if you ask a farmer in Ouagadougou, they won't talk about policy. They'll point to a cashew sapling and say, "That is my dream. It has leaves." They don't need reports. They need a reason to stay, not migrate. They need something that feeds their children, not just keeps them alive. And Traoré understands that. He's not just planting trees, he's planting hope. Hope that this time, the wealth won't be shipped away in shipping containers. The Minister of Agriculture declared, "We are not just planting trees, we are rewriting history." And while the West is still busy debating feasibility, mothers in Kaya are forming seedling cooperatives. Schools are teaching kids how cashews could pay for college. Children now dream, not of escape, but of building something here. You see, this is not an agricultural program. This is a survival plan. But even as young leaves tremble in the wind, One silent question creeps through the orchards. Will these 20 million trees bring a golden harvest or bury us under a dangerous illusion? If you're still watching, don't look away, because in the next chapter, we'll uncover the hidden betrayal behind this campaign, where hundreds of tons of cashews may already be leaving the country before a single Burkina hand gets paid. Subscribe now, because what's coming next might shake your faith in who's really in charge. Stolen before they ripen, the cashew heist no one saw coming. By year 2, the cashew orchards stretched across the Sahel like green veins on scorched earth. Farmers beamed with pride. Children played between rows of trees once thought impossible. Ministers gave speeches. Traoré smiled on national television. And then the trucks came. Not government trucks, not local cooperatives, but private, unmarked convoys rolling in from border zones, offering cash up front for raw cashews. No processing, no oversight, no taxes, just sacks of nuts, loaded fast and whisked away. To where? India, Vietnam. The same old story. The people had not even tasted the fruit, but it was already gone. At first, the government denied it. Then a whistleblower leaked a report, quietly buried deep in bureaucratic archives. The numbers were devastating. Over 80% of the cashew harvest was leaving the country raw, unprocessed, untaxed, untraceable. The same foreign companies Traoré vowed to defy were back. Only this time, they weren't wearing suits. They were in pickup trucks, wearing smiles, handing out just enough money to make it feel like profit, while robbing an entire nation blind. It was cotton all over again. Villagers in Wahiguya watched helplessly as trucks disappeared down red dirt roads. A farmer stood by the gate of his orchard, tears mixing with dust. "They lied to us with cotton," he said. "Now they come again, with cashews." The betrayal cut deep. Was this a revolution, or just another resource rush with a new face? But the same rules. Even the soldiers were confused. Some had planted those trees themselves. Now, they watched as foreign buyers carted them away. Midway through the season, activists stormed the Ministry of Trade. "Where are the processing plants?" they shouted. "Where is our profit?" Opposition leaders pounced. They accused the government of grandstanding, of launching a cashew revolution with no real plan to protect the harvest. And Traoré, he stayed silent for weeks. Then came the leak. A confidential memo revealed the worst. Burkina Faso had signed exclusive export deals with private brokers, many based abroad, months before the first harvest. The people were outraged. This wasn't just bad policy. This was betrayal. So we ask you, if a revolution is stolen before it bears fruit, was it ever real? Is Burkina Faso rising or being harvested? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to know how Traoré fights back, how this betrayal turns into a new phase of war, subscribe now, because the next move changes everything. Cashew gold or political landmine, what they didn't tell you. The scandal broke like a thunderclap, but the shockwaves were just beginning. In the dusty villages of Kaya and Kudugu, once buzzing with hope, a chill set in. Women who had led seedling cooperatives began to shut their nurseries. Traders pulled back. Farmers stopped digging. The cashew miracle had become a dirty word. And trust, gone. For many Burkinabe, it felt like déjà vu. They'd seen this movie before, with cotton, with gold, with foreign aid, a cycle of promises, exploitation, and abandonment. But this time, it was different. This time, they knew who to blame. The betrayal stung because it wasn't hidden behind boardrooms in Paris. It was happening right there in the fields. And it wasn't the West pulling the strings. It was their own leaders signing the papers. Suddenly, posters of Traoré vanished from market stalls. Local radio hosts, once praising the revolution, began airing angry call-ins. How can we fight jihadists, but not fight for our own cashews? One woman asked on a live show in Dori. The fury boiled over in Parliament. Opposition MPs slammed the government for selling out the very revolution it claimed to lead. Protests flared in Bobo Dioulasso. At the gates of the Ministry of Agriculture, a grandmother held up a sign. "We planted your promise. Now where is our harvest?" But it wasn't just anger, it was fear. Cashews were supposed to be the escape route from food aid, from loans, from being treated like beggars in suits. Now, that route seemed closed, and the timing couldn't be worse. Across the Sahel, jihadist groups were watching. Whispers emerged that militants were trying to recruit angry farmers, promising protection, cash, even buying cashews at higher prices. Let that sink in. A crop meant to fight poverty was now being weaponized to fund insurgency. In some regions, security commanders begged the government to get ahead of the crisis. If we lose the farmers, one warned, we lose the country. And in the capital, Ouagadougou, a deeper question was now being whispered behind closed doors. Did Traoré move too fast? His dream was bold, but was it built on sand? Some analysts argued he had no choice. With the West pulling aid and regional tensions rising, Burkina Faso had to act. Cashews were the quickest lever of sovereignty. But now, that lever looked more like a landmine. The economic ministry scrambled. Plans were rushed to accelerate domestic processing. Emergency funds were pledged, but the people wanted more than apologies. They wanted ownership. And as election whispers began to circulate, one message grew louder: no sovereignty without cashew justice. So now we ask you, can a nation survive when its greatest hope becomes its deepest wound? Will the cashew tree rise again or rot at the root? Leave your thoughts below. And if you want to see how this political crisis turns into a national reckoning, hit subscribe now. Because the next chapter takes the fight to the factories. Washington watches, Beijing waits. Who will swallow Africa's cashew? From the White House to Beijing, one question is echoing through corridors of power. Is Burkina Faso truly rising or about to fall? Because behind the glossy headlines of a cashew revolution lies a colder reality. Cashews aren't just food, they're strategic assets. In Washington, think tanks are watching in silence. At the Pentagon, a leaked internal memo warns global competition for agricultural supply chains is shifting. Burkina Faso is emerging as the new magnet. The U.S. Department of Agriculture quietly sends a delegation to Ouagadougou. No cameras, no speeches. They're not here for the cashews. They're here for leverage, because if Burkina Faso succeeds in processing, packaging, and shipping kernels directly to Paris, New York, and Berlin, they're no longer a dependent backwater. They're a player. Meanwhile, China isn't silent. Beijing already dominates cashew supply routes in Ivory Coast and Nigeria. Now, they're inching into Burkina Faso. A so-called private Chinese firm begins funding a shelling facility in Ouagadougou. At the same time, a low-interest infrastructure loan is suggested to the government. The debt trap is being laid, step by step, without a sound. And India and Vietnam. They're angry, but calculated. Processing hubs in Bin Phuoc and Kerala are worried. If Burkina Faso retains 50% of its cashews for local processing, prices for raw nuts could spike, cutting off cheap supply. In Geneva, global logistics firms hold emergency meetings. Whoever controls cashews controls Africa's flow of goods into Europe. And as the great powers wrestle for soft influence nut by nut, something else quietly shifts: Africa's voice. At the World Food Expo in Paris, a tiny booth labeled Product of Faso draws a surprising crowd. "Your cashews taste like the future," a French entrepreneur remarks. For the first time in decades, a Sahel nation is selling value, not surrender, not raw nuts, but a sovereignty story roasted crisp and packaged with pride. But global powers don't give up easily. So we ask you, now that cashews are weapons in a global war for influence, who do you think will win? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because next, we go inside the factories, where the battle for Burkina Faso's future is being forged in steel and sweat. Steel, sweat, and sovereignty. Will Burkina Faso finish what it started? The fields were only the beginning. The real war for value, for dignity, for control was now inside the factories. In the industrial zone of Bobo Dioulasso, steam hissed from cashew dryers, machines roared, and on the floor, hundreds of young Burkinabe, many of them women, stood shoulder to shoulder, cracking shells not just for export, but for independence. "This isn't a factory," one supervisor said. "It's a battlefield, and every kernel we process is a bullet in our fight for sovereignty." By the third year, the numbers were shifting. Local processing had jumped from near zero to nearly 30%. Exports of Product of Faso were gaining traction in Europe, the US, even Japan. Factories popped up in Koudougou, in Gawa, even in the volatile north, where jobs meant more than wages. They meant security. But progress came at a price. Power outages delayed shipments. Corruption scandals surfaced. Contracts awarded in the dark. Kickbacks whispered behind closed doors. Some machines sat idle, waiting for spare parts stuck at customs. And the world still skeptical. European economists warned Burkina Faso can't compete with Asia. A British columnist mocked, "Let them crack their dreams. Vietnam will still roast their future." But inside those factories, nobody was listening. A woman named Aminata, once a street vendor, now ran a quality control station. "Before, we begged," she said, inspecting a tray of golden nuts. "Now, we produce. And that changes everything." For her, the stakes were simple. If the factories fell, the revolution would crumble with them. So the government pushed harder. Microloans to cooperatives, solar panels for rural plants, training programs for technicians, and most importantly, a promise that no matter the obstacles, Burkina Faso would process at least half of its cashews at home. Because this was no longer just about nuts. It was about narrative. And Traoré knew if they could crack the global cashew market, they could crack the cycle of dependency. But it all depends on what happens next. So now we ask you, will these factories forge a new Africa or rust into symbols of another dream deferred? Leave your thoughts below. And if you believe sovereignty isn't just an idea, but something you build with your hands, subscribe now. Because in the final chapter, we face the storm that could uproot it all. 20 million trees, one future. Will they stand or burn? The cashew orchards now stretch farther than the eye can see. From Kaya to Gawa, from the highlands to the dry Sahel, 20 million trees whisper a single question into the wind. Will we survive? At sunset, they glow gold in the dying light. Roots sunk deep in a thirsty land. Leaves fluttering like fragile flags of a young republic daring to stand tall. Burkina Faso has done something few thought possible. They've turned a nut into a national movement, a kernel of hope into a global headline. Cashews now pay for school books, for solar lights, for clinics that once sat empty. But here's the truth. Hope is not a harvest, and not all seeds bloom. This past year, a brutal drought scorched the north. Entire orchards withered. Farmers watched their dreams curl and die in the dust. And yet, they did not give up. Instead, they replanted. Because to them, these trees aren't just agriculture. They are memory. They are resistance. Every seedling a monument to those who said, "We will not beg. We will build." But now, a greater storm brews. Climate change is no longer a theory here. It's the heat in the soil, the silence in the wells, and the ticking clock above every farm and factory. If the rains fail again, if foreign corporations tighten their grip, if corruption poisons what the people built, then this miracle could crumble.